The tiny gold key was barely bigger than my thumbnail, and it caught the morning light as my parents handed it to my sister Victoria with absolute pride. We were all gathered in the living room on Christmas morning, surrounded by wrapping paper and half-empty coffee cups. My parents announced that the key opened the front door to a house they had just purchased for Victoria. A house. They had bought their younger daughter a house. I felt the ground shift beneath me. My hands clenched into fists. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and heartbreak that I couldn't quite name. My mother looked at me and said, with the most casual tone imaginable, "You'll understand one day, Madeline." That phrase, those 6 words, they hang in the air like poison. You'll understand one day, like this wasn't fair right now. But eventually I would comprehend why my younger sister, who had never sacrificed anything, who had never worked for anything, was being given a house while I stood there with nothing. I excused myself and went to my room. Once the door was closed, I let myself shake. I felt anger coursing through my entire body. I felt betrayal so sharp it was almost physical pain. I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how my parents could do this. I had been the responsible one my entire life. I had taken extra shifts at my job to help with family expenses. I had stayed home to help around the house. I had kept the peace when my sister acted out. I had been loyal and dutiful and unseen. Meanwhile, Victoria had coasted through life on charm and smiles. She had done nothing to earn anything, and yet here she was, receiving a house like it was nothing. I could hear her downstairs, laughing and thanking our parents over and over again. I could hear my mother's pride in her voice. That was when something shifted inside me, not into anger, but into something colder and more focused. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. I wasn't going to spend my life resenting my parents for their favoritism. My name is Madeline Harper, and I need you to understand something from the very beginning. This isn't a story about revenge or cruelty. This is a story about what happens when you stop seeking validation from people who have never been equipped to give it to you. This is a story about building a life so undeniably good that the contrast speaks for itself. I'm 31 years old now. I work in project management for a successful consulting firm. I have a career that I built through hard work and intelligence. But that morning on Christmas, I was 26 and broke and exhausted and completely overlooked by the people who were supposed to love me equally. That evening, we had a family dinner to celebrate the holidays and Victoria's achievement. My parents couldn't stop talking about the house. They talked about the neighborhood and the investment value, and how proud they were of Victoria for being such a wonderful daughter that they wanted to give her this gift. They talked about it like it was nothing, like they hadn't just handed one child a house while leaving the other empty-handed. People said things like, "Victoria is so lucky," and "what a blessing." I sat at the table and listened to every word. I observed every smirk from my sister. I noticed every patronizing comment from my parents. My mother said to me, "Maybe one day you'll have something like this too, honey." Her tone suggested that day was very far away. My father didn't address me at all. He just kept refilling his wine glass and talking about market investments. I said very little that evening. I just listened and watched and calculated. That night, after everyone had left and my parents had gone to bed, I sat at my desk and opened a notebook. I started writing down everything I could remember about that day. Every comment, every look, every moment of injustice. But I also wrote something else. I wrote a plan. It wasn't a plan for revenge or for making my sister suffer. It was a plan for myself. I wrote, "They may have given her a key, but I'm going to build my own door." I'm going to build a life that is so undeniably good that the comparison becomes obvious without me having to say anything. I'm going to stop waiting for their approval and start creating my own validation. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but I knew that I was done being invisible. The week after Christmas, I threw myself into my work. I had been doing my job adequately, showing up, completing tasks, doing what was required. But I had never really pushed myself. I had never really tried to excel. Now, I decided to change that. I started volunteering for the most difficult projects. I started staying late to refine my work. I started really paying attention to what made my colleagues and my managers successful. I began to see patterns. The people who got promoted were the ones who made others look good. They were the ones who solved problems before anyone else even knew problems existed. I decided to become that person. My sister was posting constantly on social media about the house. She uploaded photos from different angles. She talked about the renovations she was planning. She posted about hosting dinner parties and inviting friends over. She seemed to genuinely believe that she had accomplished something by receiving a free house from her parents. Every time I saw a post, I felt a twinge of something, envy, maybe, or frustration, but I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't let her know that any of it bothered me. I just kept my head down and worked. A few months after Christmas, my company launched a major project for one of our biggest clients. The project was complicated and had high stakes. My manager, Thomas, had been trying to figure out the approach for weeks. He was struggling. I could see it in how he moved through the office, distracted, stressed, uncertain. One afternoon, I approached him and said, "I've been thinking about the client's needs, and I have a suggestion for how we might approach this." I laid out my idea. He listened, and then he nodded slowly. "This is exactly what we need," he said. By the end of the week, Thomas had implemented my approach, and the project started moving forward. My colleagues began to notice. They began to ask me for input on their own projects. I struggled sometimes with the emotional weight of everything. There were nights when I went home and felt angry all over again. There were moments when I thought about my sister living in that free house while I was paying rent on a modest apartment that took most of my salary. There were times when I wanted to call my parents and tell them exactly how unfair they had been. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I journaled. I wrote down my feelings, and then I wrote down why those feelings didn't change my plan. I reminded myself that my worth wasn't dependent on my parents' recognition. I reminded myself that building something real and good for myself was more important than getting them to acknowledge their unfairness. I started observing my parents' behavior more carefully. I noticed patterns in how they operated. I noticed that they were indulgent with Victoria in ways that actually hurt her. They never told her no. They never expected her to work for anything. They never taught her the value of perseverance or struggle. They had created a situation where their younger daughter had every advantage, but no actual foundation. Meanwhile, I had learned resilience. I had learned how to work hard. I had learned how to survive without safety nets. I realized that my parents' favoritism was actually destroying Victoria, not helping her. This realization shifted something inside me. My anger began to transform into compassion, not for my parents, but for my sister. At work, I started deliberately taking on projects that highlighted different skill sets. I worked on one project where I had to manage a team. I worked on another where I had to problem solve under pressure. I worked on a third where I had to communicate complex ideas to clients. Each project was a chance to build a different aspect of my professional reputation. My colleagues started coming to me for advice. Younger employees started asking if I would mentor them. My managers started including me in high-level strategic meetings. I took a junior employee named Marcus under my wing. He was talented but discouraged. He felt like he didn't fit in at the company. I spent time with him, helping him understand his strengths and how to showcase them. I showed him how to think strategically about his career. I introduced him to people who could help him advance. Marcus started to flourish. He got promoted. He came to me one day and said, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." That moment meant more to me than any promotion or raise ever could. I realized that I had discovered something important. I had discovered that helping other people rise up was more satisfying than any amount of personal success. My sister, meanwhile, was mismanaging the house that had been given to her. She didn't understand basic things like home maintenance and property taxes. She had to call our parents multiple times for help. She made costly mistakes with renovations because she didn't understand how to properly plan or budget. I heard about all of this through family conversations, but I never commented. I never pointed out her mistakes. I simply observed. At a work event, my sister was present. She had started working in marketing and occasionally attended company social functions. At one point, she was bragging to a group of colleagues about the house she owned and how she was going to invest in real estate like our parents. One of my colleagues, someone I had been mentoring, gently asked her about her investment strategy. Victoria couldn't answer the question. She didn't know how to talk about her actual experience because she didn't have any. She was relying entirely on her parents' name and money. I watched as my colleagues realized the difference between someone who had accomplished something and someone who had simply been given something. I wrote myself a letter. I sat down one evening and wrote to my future self. I wrote, "Madeline, you have every right to be angry about how you've been treated. Your parents' favoritism is real. The unfairness is real. But you get to choose whether you let their choices define you. You get to choose whether you build your life around proving them wrong or around proving yourself right. I hope you choose the latter. I hope you build something so good and so real that you stop needing them to acknowledge it. I hope you become the kind of person you admire. I hope you stop looking back." I kept that letter. I still have it. My colleagues and my friends started to really see me. They started to come to me not because they felt obligated, but because they genuinely respected me. I wasn't the person trying to prove something anymore. I was the person who had already proven herself through consistent, undeniable excellence. The way people treated me changed. The opportunities that came my way changed. I started getting offers from other companies. My own company started promoting me into more senior positions. My parents announced another gift for Victoria. They were going to help her start a business. They were going to use their connections and their money to give her a head start in an industry where she had no experience. I heard this news, and I felt absolutely nothing. I had moved beyond the point where their choices affected me emotionally. I was building something that was entirely my own. I noticed that Victoria was struggling. The pressure of trying to run a business that she wasn't prepared for was crushing her. She was working long hours and still making mistakes. She was stressed all the time. One day, she reached out to me and asked if we could have coffee. We met at a cafe, and she looked exhausted. "How do you do it?" she asked me. "How do you manage to be so put together all the time? How do you know what you're doing?" I looked at my sister, and I felt genuine compassion for her. "I fail a lot," I told her. "I make mistakes, but I learn from them, and I do it alone. I do it without a safety net. That's what forces you to actually become competent." At a family holiday party, there was a moment where my sister almost publicly embarrassed herself. She was talking about her business to some of our extended family, and she was clearly exaggerating her accomplishments. I could see it happening. I could see her about to say something that would expose how inexperienced she was. I quietly caught her eye and changed the subject. I moved the conversation in a different direction. Later, she pulled me aside and thanked me. "I almost said something really stupid," she said. I nodded. "You did," I said, "but I didn't let you." She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I think in that moment, she understood that I was stronger than she was. Not stronger in the way our parents had made her feel superior, but actually stronger. I felt the pull, sometimes to lash out. I felt the temptation to tell my parents exactly how unfair they had been. I felt the desire to make them understand the pain they had caused me. But I knew that doing those things would only tie me to their drama. So I maintained my strategic calm. I continued to build. I continued to excel. I focused on the fact that my life was becoming genuinely good, not because I was proving anything to anyone, but because I was building something real. I was promoted to a senior position at my company. This wasn't a small achievement. This was a significant career milestone. I was now managing a team of 12 people. I was involved in strategic decisions. I was being paid well. I was respected by my peers and my superiors. I had built this entirely on my own merit. When I told my parents about the promotion, their response was muted. They congratulated me, but there was no real excitement in their voices. It was like they didn't quite know how to be proud of me. That was fine. I didn't need their excitement anymore. The real turning point came during a family gathering. I was talking about a complex project I had completed, and I was genuinely excited about it. I was explaining the challenges we had faced and how I had solved them. As I talked, I noticed my parents' faces changing. I noticed them truly realizing that I had accomplished something significant. And simultaneously, I noticed my sister sitting quietly, aware of the gap between us. She had been handed everything, and yet she had nothing. I had been handed nothing, and yet I had everything. My sister made a real effort to connect with me after that gathering. She was no longer defensive or superior. She was genuinely interested in understanding how I had built my career. She started asking me for advice about her business. I gave her advice freely, not out of any obligation, but because I actually wanted to help her succeed. I realized that my sister wasn't a bad person. She was just someone who had been raised in a system that had set her up to fail. I achieved something significant at work. My project won an award. My name was published in industry journals. My success became undeniable and visible. My parents finally started to acknowledge what I had built, but by that point, their acknowledgement meant very little to me. I had already built a life that was complete without their validation. I had already moved beyond the need for their approval. As I reflect on this entire journey, I realize that the Christmas morning when my parents handed my sister a house key was the beginning of my actual life. It was the moment I stopped waiting for permission to be extraordinary. It was the moment I stopped seeking validation from people who had never been equipped to give it. I built a career. I built genuine friendships. I built a life of integrity and excellence. And I did it all on my own terms. My parents eventually came to understand that they had made a mistake in how they treated me. But by then, I had already healed. By then, I had already moved on. The greatest vindication wasn't proving them wrong. It was proving myself right. It was becoming the kind of person I could respect, independent of anyone else's opinion. That was the real victory,